It says that we are live. Hey everyone, Annemarie Matulis here. Impacted Family and Friends. And let's see, the titles go. Director for Impacted Family and Friends Division at the American Association of Suicidology, co-founder of the Impacted Family and Friends movement that you will find on avoiceatthetable.org. And most recently, I'll throw in the latest one that I have is I was just recently appointed to the executive committee of the American Association of Suicidology. And what does that mean? It means there's more work, probably.
Right.
Other than that, there's really not a whole lot. And Jackie Christmas is saying, hey, hey, to us already. And Pata, why don't you give a little bit about why you're here and how you ended up within the Impacted Family and Friends movement?
Sure. I'm Pata Sumoto, and I am a member of the American Association for Suicidology's Impacted and Family Friends Division. I am also the co-coordinator for Massachusetts for Impacted Family and Friends, and I am also the co-chair of the Greater Boston Regional Suicide Prevention Coalition and the chair of the People of Color Caucus of the Massachusetts Coalition for Suicide Prevention Alliance for Equity. And I ended up here. I can't just say because you told me so. No, I'm just joking.
No.
I ended up here. I have a daughter who struggles with suicidal ideation and with other kinds of mental health concerns. And so Impacted Family and Friends is a place, as a home for me to be able to understand my relationship with her and my relationship to myself, and how I can best be a support for her and for myself. So, and that's sort of how I ended up here. And yeah.
Yeah. So how did I end up here? That is a good question. Let's see. Back in 2013, I happened to see a show on C-SPAN when I was had C-SPAN attached to my hip. And so what happened with that is Richard McKeon from SAMHSA and Jerry Reed, who at that time, Dr. Jerry Reed, who was that time with the Suicide Prevention Resource Center group, we're doing a program that on C-SPAN that was Suicide is Everyone's Business. And they had some veterans on who were suicide attempt survivors. And they were talking about how important it was to have that voice be heard. Then within weeks, we were in Bristol County, we're hosting a community conversation, and Craig Miller, who is also a suicide attempt survivor, shared his story. And within a couple of days, Craig and Tracy Medeiros, whom you all know as the Minion, and Zach Williams, who at that time was with the Taunton Community Access public access station, TCAM, here in Taunton, Mass. We sat around a table and we talked about, gee, we should probably do maybe a 5 or 10 minute little YouTube video about suicide attempt survivors, voices that were incredibly marginalized. Within 2 hours, we sort of were tapping on the table and realized we had a title for a documentary called A Voice at the Table, because that's what we were talking about. In post-production of that documentary, I recognized that there were 2 lethal gaps in resources for people with lived experience. One was that suicide attempt survivors further along the healing path did not have any peer-to-peer wellness workshops. They just didn't exist out there. There was the Dee Dee Hirsch model, which was for immediate crisis, but there were no peer-to-peer sessions for those who had now moved, 5, 10, even 15 years away from their last suicide attempt. A little check-in. There was also a lethal gap in that people like me and Pata had no resources to go to either. The families emotionally impacted and traumatized by those suicidal experiences. And so within a couple of months, as we were finishing up the documentary production, we started putting together, Tracy and I started putting together a workshop series, a curriculum for a workshop series for the attempt survivors. And I wrote a second one for impacted family. And that's how it all began, straightforward and ongoing. The question we're always asked is, how do I know I'm an impacted family member or a close friend of someone? It's a long list. We started with suicide attempt survivors. You can add chronic suicidal thinking, non-suicidal self-injury, NSSI, that's the cutting, the burning, the pulling of skin, maybe swallowing harmful things. We also know that extreme anxiety puts families in the emergency room with concerns about suicidal ideation, as does moderate to severe, and sometimes even a lighter version of depression can do that. Eating disorders and all the emotional upheaval around that could lead, whether a young person or an adult, into suicidal thinking. Problem gambling and suicide prevention has been added. Domestic violence in suicide prevention has been added. Substance abuse in domestic violence has been added. So there is a plethora of options, sadly, of families out there who sometimes don't even know what's wrong. It's kind of like a secondary PTSD, and you just don't know. So that's how it came together. There have been several iterations. I'm going to give you just a little bit of the backstory, and what Potter and I are going to do tonight is we're going to tell you a little bit about a few of our exercises. We're going to give you a little backstory on those. And then we're going to talk about how that impacted, how did that impact us? And how did we work through that in the workshops? Because I know when people keep seeing, wellness workshops, well, what does that mean? And what do we do? And how do we do it? Right now, we do everything virtual. I mean, that's the first one out of the gate. We're not doing in-person inpatient, right? In person anytime soon. And by the way, it has been working out extremely well. And so we set these, and there are going to be, again, we're already halfway through March, so we'll be posting a couple of impacted family workshop dates over the next few days, as well as we still have to re-energize and reconnect, and those workshops are for suicide attempt survivors and loss survivors further along the recovery and healing path. So that's a little bit of the background. You're going to see, at least in Massachusetts, you're going to see 12 workshop options a month. We're finishing up March, April, May, and June. Then there'll also be a national version of this that won't start until, we don't think we're going to start it until May. And then there's another version that you'll see in Massachusetts also. It's for problem gambling and suicide prevention. You don't have to worry about remembering any of that because it'll be posted everywhere. So let me tell you a little bit how we began. And then we're going to talk about our first exercise. And if I don't look at my notes, I'll get sidetracked. All right. So I just wanted to let everybody know that the Finding Inner Peace is a workshop format that will gently, and we do mean gently and informally, guide participants through what some might call a spiritual and emotional inventory. And it will offer suggestions on how to better recognize our own behaviors. Remember, this is the oxygen mask theory. Axiom, not theory. It's proven scientifically. When you're on a plane and those damn masks come down, on yourself first and foremost. And if you don't do that, you're not capable of helping someone else. And that's the same with impacted family. If we can't put ourselves in emotional balance, then how can we help someone else that we're going along? And feel free to use the chat and jump things in. And I just realized, by the way, everyone, if you're on my Facebook page, Annemarie Matulis at Facebook, you're not going to see this, I guess. I forgot to change one of the settings. So if you jump over at the Impacted Family and Friends Facebook page, this is going live as it is on YouTube. My channel, Annemarie Matulis /YouTube. So we're going with that. And what we're doing with this is nothing new. I mean, I'd love to say that we had this great idea and it's so unique that we put it together. This kind of process has existed like for a lifetime. No doubt about it. It's about getting together with people who know exactly how you feel, which is kind of important, rather than someone who's read it in a book or has a perception of what it's about. And you sort of walk around, and where you find that turnaround from fear, because we do become fear driven as parents and family and close friends, because we want our loved ones to stay safe. And these workshops into from fear to inner peace, and these can be held weekly. That's a lot of emotional heavy lifting if you do these week after week after week after week, unless you're like us and we're presenting them week after week after week after week. And we also maintain that participation should be really wide open and flexible. You can show up halfway through one and not go to the next two, and show up again when you want. We want this available to you as you need it, not what we think is the best time to do it. And when fear has ruled us for a long time, even if you don't realize that's what it is, there's no quick fix. I would love to tell you that it's you could do one of these and you're going to suddenly all of a sudden feel bad. It doesn't work that way. We take them down. We take the fear down one brick at a time along the journey, and then we stay on this path and we move forward. We nurture our hope and we keep it lit like a flickering flame. And then unexpectedly, we're going to feel comfortable. We're going to laugh again, and even in the face of crisis, we will maintain an emotional balance that is so needed. We also want to let you know that what we do here is peer to peer. It is evidence based. It is a psych educational format. It has been vetted over and over again over the last 7 years, field tested, great evaluations, and those with all the letters after their names. And I'm not saying that facetiously or sarcastically, because you have to have those people with all the letters after their names approve this to be able to put the evidence-based title on it. So that is a lot of where we go with this. So we've told you about who we are, sort of, what it is that we do with this. And then I think the last piece I want to just touch on before we actually get into this is, let me tell you, these are a couple of comments that people passed after completing. And into the typical series would be 5 months, once a month, take a couple of months off because it's emotional heavy lifting, and then do another 5 months. Now that we have broken that mold completely, because we're doing 12 a month, because there are a lot of people in Massachusetts and we can't expect you all to show up. And the other thing is, we don't try to have this as a big group. This doesn't work with 100 people. This needs to be small and intimate, so you can develop a sense of trust and confidence, confidentiality, and a sense of family within your group, even though it may change. And here's what one of our participants said, "This is what I did to fight against the fear that controlled my body, mind, and soul. And it really helped me to find a longer lasting inner peace, even in the midst of the emotional chaos and storms that were swirling around me. And by that, it was meant that there may have been more emergency department visits, more visits to the hospital. Some kids may have had to spend more time out of school." And another shared that they learned to stop obsessing over their loved one and look and listen at themselves, because she was getting worn out, um, and realized she wasn't taking care of herself. And that's what these workshops are all about, teaching us. And this was from a loss survivor, because we do have loss survivors at our table for two reasons. One, in retrospect, they realized that they had been impacted before losing a loved one to suicide, and they remember that fear. And sometimes it can haunt them and follow them right into the rest of their lives. Or now that they have begun some movement on the healing and recovery path, the fear sets in about loved ones who are still with them, that they too then might end up in a suicidal crisis, which unfortunately is not all of that unusual. It's that fear of the title of the original workbook, "Is this the night?" Can I go to sleep tonight? Can I let them sleep without their door wide open tonight? And there's a whole plethora of stuff that goes with that. So that's what we've told you. The ultimate goal of these workshops is to help you find some inner peace. She said, hopefully. So, Pata, anything you want to add before we start with the exercises?
No, I think it's important in my mind that people come to it just willing and open, just
Mm,
open. I mean,
yeah.
because if you're open, you can take in hopefully some of the things that and work through some of the things that are presented. And I think, yeah, and the sharing is like the most important thing. At least, my experience is that you hear someone, you're like, oh yeah, and that too.
Yeah, and that too. So if you are out there, and I know we have found that an awful lot of people do, it's probably bad English, but I don't care, are actually watching, you're lurking out there, and you do not want to touch that chat, you feel free as we start to talk about what we learned from these exercises. Um, and feel free to zip that into the chat box and not to worry about it, that we're going through. But we're going to pretend that you're all sitting here staring with your pen in hand and your notepad beside you. So one of the other questions, before I forget, that people have asked over the years. God, look, my kid's still in the emergency department in the back room, don't even know where he or she is going right now. Why would I want to be doing this at that point? It's within that very chaos that you need help.
Hmm.
And you need to be able, even if you have to sit at the table in silence, you need to be able to surround yourself with other impacted family, because we do know how you feel. We go through that. So one of the exercises that we have, and now I'd love to tell you that these are all, I just thought, no, I didn't just think of all this stuff. These are laced with dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and a huge dash of 12-step modality, and taking things from everything we possibly can. Now, I'm a fan of the Lord of the Rings series, so it seemed like a perfect way to talk about. I remember when I saw this piece, I saw this clip in the film, and I actually made a conscious note. I went, "Oh, I like that. We're going to use that someday." And it's called "How Did It Come to This?" And if you've seen the films, you may remember that when it looked like there was no hope, um, within the Lord of the Rings, because what King Theoden was asking was, where is the horse and the rider? They were looking for the rest. They were looking for the cavalry. Where's the horn that was blowing before? They have passed like rain into the mountain, like wind into the meadow. The days have gone down in the west behind the hills into shadows. How did it come to this? And so what we're talking about is that is one of the biggest questions impacted family members will say to themselves. And we have had this confirmed over and over, that somewhere in the early chaos of having someone in a suicidal crisis, we stand there and we say, well, how did it come to this? How did this happen? Because we have this really bad habit, at least in Western cultures, that family members and close friends, who have someone who has suddenly gone into a suicidal crisis, and it seems, just unbearable. We want to lash out, and we have this. I don't know if it's learned behavior or it's instinctual, but we want to blame someone for how did this happen. Typically, parents will blame themselves. I'm a bad parent. What's wrong? How did this happen? And that creates the silence that can swirl around getting help, both for yourself and for your loved one, because of the prejudice and stigma that we're going to talk about a little later. If I say to someone that my child needs mental health support, they're going to think I'm a bad parent. And now no one has ever said that to anyone. I've asked them directly, did anyone ever say that? Well, no, but that's how I know they feel. We have to be careful of perception. Potter and I were talking about that
Hmm.
earlier today. So what do we do? Here's one of the things that happens when your loved one leaves the hospital. If they had to go to the ED, or they had to go inpatient, they come out the door and you come out the door with a stack of stuff on how to take care of your loved one. A safety plan, who to call, where the resources are. No one ever says, are you okay?
Hmm.
What resources do we have to give you? Because they didn't have any, and they still don't have many. to do. So what do we do as the impacted family? And so we have a few little bullet points here that we talk about in this exercise. Pata, do you want to start with it?
Start with the bullet points, or do you want me
Yeah.
to, you want me to read
Well,
them? Or do you want me
yeah.
to talk about them? You want me
Why
to-
don't you just read them down and then just, share some of your lived experience with
Sure.
this?
So eliminate the word blame from your vocabulary and your thoughts. Don't blame anyone, including yourself. Stop searching and prodding for reasons why. They will be revealed over time. Recognize that you need to do something about your inner feelings and anger. Accept that this workshop series is not something to be put off and do later. The content needs to be addressed now if you truly want to help and support your loved ones. And none of this will be easy, but in the long run, it'll be incredibly beneficial all around. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there is a tendency to think, I'm in crisis, I don't have time for this, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so that's one critical error, I think, in terms of that, because we need to make time for it. Otherwise, we can't be the best for our loved ones. And I think the blame game, I think a lot of times we get involved in the blame game and I'm going to blame myself, or I'm going to blame, or people blame the person who's struggling. If you only did such and such, right? But that doesn't help anyone, because you're in this situation right now, and if blaming the person is not going to make them better, in fact, it might make them worse. And blaming yourself is not going to make you any better person to take care of the person who is struggling. Blaming yourself is going to make you feel worse and be less able to do the kinds of things. So eliminate the word blame from your vocabulary, get rid of it. So then the question is, well, now what, right? And so I think the thing about how did it come to this is a really individual story too, right? For me, um, my daughter, I've had these moments where I've asked that question, but sometimes because I live with lived experience too, I mean, I have my own mental health concerns, I'm almost too quick to ask that question. Because I'll see something happen and I'll be like, are we, where are we, right? So that whole question of like sometimes people are surprised. Like a lot of times you hear people, particularly in certain communities, I know in the Asian American community, where well, again, we'll talk about the stigma, but there's a lot of stigma in the Asian American community, and sometimes that gets in the way of people being able to really say, well, this is real and going on in my life and in my family's life. So Annemarie, do you want to jump in and then
Yeah. And I moved my page. Wait. No doing that. And again, I'm going to jump in on a couple of the other pieces that we talk about, and that is that we hear it from families. They go crazy and they go on Zoom. They're so frustrated. There's a frenzy. I've got to find the answers. I've got to find the answers. Sometimes it's not so good to do to go Googling on a lot of this, because you'll come up with a lot of junk. You'll come up with a lot of myths and misconceptions, and the reasons why. What I discovered was the reasons why there was a suicide attempt within my family was that there were so many underlying causes, so many things that I subconsciously knew. It wasn't like I was not I have been in public health for 35 years. My early exposure to public health work was my own lived experience, and that was as domestic violence. And so I was involved in that. And some of the same questions apply there too. That's why we talk about that. And by the way, what I can tell you right now that most people won't is that we know that a high percentage of people, I believe it's 20 to 25% of those who have experienced domestic violence, men and women, will have some kind of suicidal thinking that goes on. And that happened to me. You know, when I figured that out and I was able to say it out loud about 6 weeks ago. 38 years out of the violence. And what I did is someone asked me, give me some example of suicidal thinking. And so I had to put these questions to myself too. And I rattled off the things that I had personally experienced. And that is, well, I'd go to bed at night, maybe, and ask God to not let me wake up. Or I would say things, I can't take this anymore. Only it would be every day I would say that. And do you jump up and say, oh, suicidal thinking, bad, bad, bad? And it's like, no, 65 million people a year will have a fleeting suicidal thought. It does not a suicide make. So I did the searching and Tracy and I do this together. So she's used to me talking about her, because I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong with all my public health information. I thought I was saying things the right way. I thought I was doing the right things to support her. And so I found myself after her last attempt, just shaking my head and saying, what didn't I do? What more? Why did this happen? I listen when she talks. Of course, she wouldn't talk about everything. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge to not blame yourself for what has happened. It's not about blame. There's a psychache that none of us can even begin to understand if we haven't experienced it. But being around a table with other people who have let those questions enter into their mind, and then finding out you're not the only one who had those thoughts, and that eventually you may find out some of the answers, you may never find out all the answers. But the hope of these workshops is you find some peace within with what's in front of you. I say it oftentimes to people, you did the best you could with what you had to work with. We all do that, and that's okay. And that's okay. So
And
we're
I just
yeah,
asked
go ahead.
one thing.
Yeah.
And you do the best I always tell my daughter, do the best you can with what you're given at any given moment. And if you're not satisfied with it, you can learn.
Awesome. Yeah. Yep. So are we telling you that you might be going back to self-inventory school for the rest of your life? Probably.
Exactly.
Because over time you see things differently. Look at me, 38 years to figure out you had suicidal thinking, Annemarie, for 5 years. But you had no idea, because I had no information and education about it. So now what we're doing tonight, by the way, these workshops, if we were in person, when we were in person, we always allowed 2 hours. That's only with 12 or 15 people around the table, because one of the things that's super, super important is letting someone be heard. And it's not about, oh, listen, hurry up, we've got to go. It's no, we take our time. If we don't finish the discussion, we carry it on to the next session. Now, this one, so we're not going through every minute in minute detail. This one, it hits home, and this was originally written for those who were in immediate crisis. So you've got someone right now within the last week or two who has been in a suicidal crisis. It's called Frozen in Time. Now, what happens is, I'm not sure we should always give answers like this, but this can come back and bite you at any given time. That fear can set in all over again, particularly with COVID. I mean, and the wearing down of all of us. And so, as family and friends of those with a suicidal crisis, disbelief that it's our loved one in danger is so common. And what do I mean by that? The number of text messages, emails, and sometimes phone calls I get in the middle of the night. It's never at 2 p.m. It is always in the middle of the night, and that's okay, everybody. I'm only gently nudging and teasing those of you who did it. So when I've been doing trainings and education and community conversations in town halls. And I will always say that one of the barriers to getting help is #NotMyKid. It might be the kid down the street, or it might be my daughter's best friend, but not my kid. And that would be the first thing the parents would say to me. Annemarie, how many times have I sat in front of you? Well, tonight it is. And they say it just like this, hashtag, it is my kid. But that is the first step forward in the whole family getting help. So I'm going to run through, these are some things that I was actually asked when we were in the workshops. Now, remember, you've got someone in suicidal crisis. It might have been 5 years ago. And you will say to us, I was planning a trip next month. Should I cancel it? I should withdraw from my volunteer work so I'm around the house more, right? Should I ask for family leave for my job? Should I resign from my job and stay home? For a loved one who is an adult, do I need to get someone to stay with them all the time? For adolescents and teens, we hear, do I let them go back to school, stay in their clubs or on their sport teams? So in other words, do we as the family and friends with loved ones in crisis remain frozen in time? Pata, your oversight on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really natural to ask those questions because you're worried, right? You know, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do to make this better? You know, and I think, you know, sometimes I don't think, and I don't know, I don't think it's a right answer. It's not a right answer or a wrong answer to these questions. No. You know what I mean? It's not like you should always take the trip or you should always cancel the trip or whatever the thing is, right?
No.
But the thing is that you can't remain frozen in time forever and be completely afraid forever, because it just doesn't, it actually creates, I think it creates more problems than it helps, you know? And so what do we do, right? You know, some of those actions in the short term, yeah, but as your loved one gets better, you have to take a risk too, I think. You know, you have to say, okay, you know, they've been out of crisis for whatever period of time, you know, a period of time, and like, yeah, you know, they need to go back to their clubs.
Yeah.
You know, or they need some alone time if they're an adult, you know. And so, you know, some of this has to really do with being able to know what are those places we're frozen, and to really look at them, to say, okay, you know, I'm thinking of resigning from my job to stay home. Well, does that make sense? I mean, what does it do to you and to your family? And, you know, are there other ways? Because, you know, you resign from your job and you no longer have a job after the person is better and on their way, right? So I think, you know, when we're in crisis, we tend to think, oh, I should get rid of this or want to jump, you know, and it doesn't always make sense. And I think these exercises are a way to slow it down.
Yep.
Slow it down, dial it back, say, you know, I'm going to, like in the exercise, we write down all of the ways that we're stuck and all of the frozen in time incidences. And then, you know, realize, because I mean, there's feelings about them too. It's not just, you know, like,
right.
So you have to like attend to the feeling you have about whatever the thing is you're thinking about doing as well. Right?
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
It does. It does. And here's what happens when we have this conversation on this particular exercise. And it's like a 900-pound elephant in the room. Because what is behind all of that fear? Is this the night there'll be another attempt?
That's right.
Is this the night she'll cut again? Or drink too much? And those are real, honest to God concerns.
Absolutely.
But if you can't say that out loud,
right.
And then it gets stuck in here. We throughout these workshops, we always talk about, well, some things are better left unsaid. Too many things left unsaid create a burden. And that burden can lead to even more of a crisis. And this also brings up, what are the barriers that we might be putting up as family that our loved ones are not comfortable coming to us to say openly, I'm having suicidal thinking. And that's why it is so important that we really learn how to find an emotional balance for ourselves so that when we hear those words, we don't roll our eyes, we don't panic, we don't look like we're going to faint or throw up. Because one of the most important things I continue to reaffirm and say over and over and again, suicidal thinking does not a suicide make. It takes a lot more for that to happen. And it's okay to say that's what I'm afraid of.
Yes.
And we want to encourage our loved ones to be able to say, I had suicidal thoughts. Because if we give them some leeway and an open door, open heart, open mind, that statement can eventually be followed with more time. I don't have a plan. I'm just telling you, I have suicidal thoughts again. That, by the way, is extremely common in almost all mental health diagnoses. But the problem is you're never told that. When you first bring your child for treatment, whether it's in an emergency room, the pediatrician, or your personal physician, if it's someone older, they say, here, take these meds. It may take a few weeks for them to kick in, but I'm not aware of anyone who tells you the truth and no matter what, you will always occasionally have the negative, dark thoughts. You may think of suicide again. It doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. The whole point of these wellness exercises in the R&R and other support systems like DBT, CBT in counseling and in different forms of therapy is to help people develop great coping skills. So in that moment of darkness, you learn how to turn it around. DBT calls it opposite thinking. Go ahead. I see that.
I also think that the reason why these workshops are so powerful is that, I mean, I don't know how many times I had to like keep my cool when my daughter was telling me something. I had to like just whoa, and take a breath and just keep my cool. But if I had nowhere to go with that feeling afterwards, it would eat me alive. But but having a community of people or having a group or something, you can bring it to there and say, oh, and I feel this way. And everyone's like, yeah, I get it. So I think that that's another benefit of these kind of wellness workshops.
And it's so important. Because we've seen what are the barriers. We've asked people in evaluations before, what are the barriers for you as an impacted family member to sit down at the table with us? Oftentimes it's myth and misunderstanding. Oh, I don't like group therapy. This is not therapy. This is a conversation with people that you don't have to explain yourself to. How nice it is to not have to explain yourself to anybody about what this is. Does that mean all of your family members are going to embrace this and be joyously enthusiastic in all the work you're going to have to do to find that emotional balance? Nope. I wish that were, but I think that is more a lack of, I won't call it contempt prior to investigation. I think it's more of people just don't know because we don't have that public forum. Impacted family members, we estimate, and so do the big data people, that we're probably the largest population within suicide prevention, but we have no political platform. We are still marginalized, and sometimes when you say impacted family, they assume we're all loss survivors. Many of us are. And by the way, that's an important thing to bring up. Pata, you want to share about just how many colors can be on this table
in terms of the
of experience?
Yeah. So I mean, if we think about it as so many different kinds of identities around suicide, there's loss survivors, there's attempt survivors, there's impacted family and friends, and then there's all of the nuances within impacted family and friends, right? I mean, there's like all the different relationships you might have, and sometimes a relationship is something that is a marginalized relationship too, and you can still be impacted, right? I mean, So I think it's really important to realize that impacted family and friends is huge. I mean, there's
Yep.
veterans, you have people, in all the different communities, the African American communities,
Right.
Asian American community. You have people, first responders. I mean, like there's so many people that are impacted, and sometimes people are impacted in many different ways, and sometimes people who are impacted also have many different other identities in relation to suicide prevention,
Right.
which is like myself. I mean, I'm a loss survivor of friends, and an attempt survivor, and an impacted family member, and I have mental illness throughout my family. Like, so it's like I'm not only an impacted family with my daughter, I'm an impacted family member with
Yep.
my mother who has passed away. So I mean, there's like, it's so layered, and I think we need to realize that when we go out, and that if you're thinking like, do I fall in this group? If you have a person in your life who has had suicidal ideation or suicidal intensity or whatever you want to call it, then the answer is probably yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often say, especially in front of a big auditorium, and I said, I know you're all asking, who is the impacted family and friend? And I said, if I go down the list, I'm going to guarantee probably 90% of you would stand up
Mhm. Mhm.
and not realize that's what it is that's
Mhm.
been bothering you. That foggy secondary post-traumatic stress. I can't even talk tonight. That can be so powerful in its primary form of
Mhm.
the trauma, but trauma unaddressed just kind of stays with you. I
Yeah.
also want to assure everybody, and we probably we need to keep saying this, how sad that we have to, but we are trying to get up to par here, is that all the work that we do within IFF, whether it's our written curriculum or anything else that we're doing, one of the wonderful blessings we have is to have Pata with us, because she keeps us on track to make sure that the language is inclusive, that it addresses equity. And that doesn't mean we have it all right,
Mhm.
because we stay open to someone coming to our table and saying, being able to hear them say, well, that isn't quite how I would
Mhm.
put it. That's fine.
Mhm.
Then how would you address it?
Mhm.
And not
Yeah.
feel it's a one size fits all type of thing. It's
Right.
not.
Right. And I mean, you have to realize too that the experience of being an impacted family member cuts across,
Mm,
but it may look different.
right.
So, as we roll these out, we're thinking about, well, what would it be like for me to do a group of Asian American women, like, who are impacted?
Hmm.
Because the cultural overlay is important. Now,
Yes.
sometimes if you're, an impacted family member and really struggling, that may not matter as much, because that's the focus. But it
Yep.
also may matter. So we need to be open to the fact that it isn't one size fits all, and that the experience cuts across, but the overlays may not. And we need to be mindful of how it might look different in a different community.
And that's important. We need to we say that and we bring that up, not to make other people, anyone feel uncomfortable, but to say we recognize that, and
Hmm.
so we are open and hopefully moldable to be able to. That's a word. Anyway, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter. I always think of clay and silly putty, even, that just we're malleable in the sense that we know we don't have it all right. And by the way, we never look at these workshops as being the answer.
Hmm.
We're hoping it can jumpstart the conversation and people can
Right.
find some healthy comfort within working on these exercises for self-improvement and awareness regarding this very anxiety driven issue of
Hmm.
suicide, so that we can continue to improve and continue to improve, and continue to have the door open so wide that people are real comfortable just kind of easing into the room.
Mhm. And
Um,
I think, when I look at the exercises, and, like if I look at it, when I look at it a second time or a third time, something else
yep,
comes up.
yep, yep,
So they're an invitation for each of us as individuals, right,
yeah.
to look at ourselves and to improve ourselves, and that's the invitation.
It is, and it's so funny when I hear someone who's been away for a while come in and sit down and say, "Oh, well, I already did this one. Oh, why don't you sit through it again?" And at the end they'll say, Okay, I hadn't seen that before. And what they mean is not about anybody else, but it's about ourselves. It's a soul care that becomes so
Mhm.
important. So now we're going to jump on. This one is always a tough one too, because I think a lot of because society says you should be doing this or that. And the title of this particular exercise, is it okay to be angry? And I'll just read a little bit of the backstory. By the way, Oxford defines anger as a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. Yeah, I've been there with all of those at one point or another on any given day.
Mhm.
However, the American Psychological Association defines anger as an emotion characterized by antagonism towards someone or something you feel has deliberately done you wrong. Anger can be a good thing. It can give you a way to express negative feelings, for example, or motivate you to find solutions to the problems. And that's kind of where we fit in.
Mhm.
Come to the table with anger. We experienced it. Um, and there are some that suggest that anger is really a fear-driven emotion and behavior. So how do you define anger? The question is rhetorical, of course, but if you were in person with us or we had more time, we'd ask you to really sit down for a few minutes and give that some thought. We're big on put it down on paper. Leaving it floating in your brain is not always helpful. It needs to come outside. And so one of the ways we do that. Um, and so what we do is we have 4 questions. Um, Powder, why don't you take the first two and I'll travel with the second two of the bullet points down at the bottom.
Am I a bad parent? That one?
Yeah.
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 The first one is, am I a bad parent if I'm angry about the situation? And I think that question plagues parents. Like, how can I get angry at this person who is struggling? It's just so hard, right? Um, Now, for me, I've done a lot of therapy, and I know that anger is an emotion that we all have, and that
Right.
um, and that this situation is, like you say, it's fear driven. No one likes to be that afraid, and so that fear can easily tip over to the anger piece of it. And I think in terms of bad parent, I mean, it's like judging yourself it's judging yourself for having an emotion.
Mm,
And that bad is a judgment, like a moral judgment, like, am I bad? And
mm.
it's like, no, you're human. Yeah. And but that sense of being a bad parent, I think, is really strong. Like, if I do something, or if I yell at my kid, I mean, even
Yeah.
when she was little, and I would, like, you get to your point, you're like, ah, and you're like, well, yeah, that whatever. The spilt Skittles didn't really deserve that. So at which point, in my life, I would back up and apologize, but which is another thing. Yeah. Um, and and then the other question is, what would people say if I admit I'm angry? Because people have judgments about anger, right? You're not supposed to be angry.
Right.
You're not supposed to be angry. Uh, and you're not supposed to, and as women, I mean, as a woman, I think I'm especially not supposed to be angry,
Yep.
you know? Um, and as a Asian woman, I'm especially not I'm supposed to be quiet. So, I mean,
Mm.
stereotypically. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we have all of these layers of things. And I think the thing is that you have to really think about, your emotions, your feelings, and not, like, I mean, not go to what would other people say, because that's a thing that I think we worry a lot about. What would other people say if
Right.
they knew X, Y, or Z about our family, about our kid, about our lives, and other people are not you. So, and so what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean? It means that you have to figure out your anger.
Right.
And it's not for other people. And the other thing is that anger that you feel, even if you don't show it, it's still there. So it can
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
bite you in the rear later if you don't address it. Go ahead.
Go ahead. All
Yeah.
right.
What do I do with these?
So the next bullet point is what do I do with these feelings? Well, there are multiple roads you can take on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, um, some people can self-medicate,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's alcohol, drugs, because they maybe they were never taught to express themselves. That's quite possible. But the other is that lingering myth. Society says if I express this anger, then what if I say it wrong? And they're going to think, what a horrible person you are. Um, it's not an easy road to walk. This is not a black and white situation because, as Pata said, we're talking about emotions, and ours can be very different than others. I would get angry at myself a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I really would. How can I? And there's a spiritual arrogance in that, by the way, that took me some writing in time to label and give it a name because who said I had the answers? You know, we may, the answers typically are within the individual in crisis, not us standing on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
but they need to be able to voice those. And so being angry, what? Because she didn't do what I wanted her to do the way I wanted her to do it in the time frame I wanted her to do it. I wanted her to stop acting that way. I wanted her to stop yelling and screaming. I wanted her to not cut and hurt herself and then be deeply regretful and remorseful, which can lead into a depth of depression. But the identifying pronoun there was I.
Mm-hmm.
This is not about me. You know, my job is to support this individual with the best love I can do. This is an illness. It's a soul sickness. It's a brain injury almost to the point. And we now know, by the way, scientifically, yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we look at the number of professional athletes who suffered massive concussions, um, and see how many had leanings towards suicidality after the fact. So we know that there's a connection there. There's also so much we don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes, like cancer, people don't get angry for people having cancer, said the cancer survivor on this side. However, it's the illness that everybody gets angry with. It's the cancer and what it does to families and what it does to whole communities, let alone the individual experiencing it. And that's how I found my clarity with anger. To not be angry at Tracy,
Mm-hmm.
but to recognize that she was being bombarded by a bully. And that bully could be depression, it could be bipolar disorder, it can be borderline personality, it could be massive anxiety. It doesn't matter. That is still a bully, an emotional and mental bully that's happening that wraps itself into suicidal thinking and suicidal behaviors. When I could redirect my anger that way, it helped me better understand. And by the way, then it took her out of the heat of the fire
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of my looks or my silence or the eyebrow up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what one of the things we hope people can come away from with these workshops, these exercises, is recognizing that our acceptance and love is also a physical gesture and a tone of voice,
Mm-hmm.
and the silent treatment because someone's not living up to our expectations of wellness. I mean, how sad is that? And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I use that term, spiritual arrogance. A lot of people look at me like, what does that mean? And I said, take off the God suit,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And let's learn to figure out what can we do here? And to do that. And then we ask this question because it's really important, I think, for people to dig a little deeper. What else have you been thinking that fits in here? So what we're talking about isn't always necessarily the relationship you have directly with your attempt survivor or the person with lived experience. But sometimes I know for me, there are certain values, behaviors, attitudes that I can very easily apply to a half a dozen different things.
Mhm.
But you know what? If I'm doing that, that means there's that undercurrent of anger, and that is fear driven. That means my life is being driven by fear. And of course, the people around me can feel that. And what do they want to do? They want to get out of the way.
Mhm.
And as far away, they say, uh-oh, she's got that look on her face.
Right.
So, and if that sounds like hard work, it is.
Mhm. But if you don't if you don't take care of the feelings though,
Right.
I mean, like, then the body language comes up.
Yep.
If you don't admit that you're angry, then you're going to turn away from the person, or your whole
Yep.
countenance will be different. So I mean, it really makes sense that we have to deal with our feelings to be able to.
Because yes, and because we'll misdirect them at someone else eventually.
Right.
Now here's the one time I'm going to tell you in this field of suicide prevention that anger is absolutely appropriate, and that is the ignorance and the lack of education in all professions about how to talk to and treat and support someone who's in a suicidal crisis.
Mhm.
We can tell you horror story after horror story after horror story that we have heard from attempt survivors and their families with the emergency departments.
Mhm.
And Tracy always puts it. She said, "I come in with high fever, chest pain, a broken limb." And it's like, Kate, and of course, when she went through her cancer treatment, it was the whole world was trying to trip over themselves to help her. She comes in, and as soon as she would mention that she's in there because she is depressed or was having suicidal thoughts, she becomes less than,
Oh yeah.
and she gets treated
Yeah.
that way.
That's right.
And it's still happening today.
Mhm.
All you have to do, take a little browse through Twitter sometime and take a look at yet more people talking about the absolutely injustice and ignorance with which they or their loved ones that were treated in a recent hospitalization because the word suicide had come up.
I know. Yeah.
In depression, you can only, you might not even get to the S word. You might say depressed or something along those lines. And still get treated that way. So we've got a lot of community education that has to go
Mhm.
on out there too.
And that anger is advocacy.
Yes, it is.
That's activism and
Yep.
advocacy. And
Yep.
so that's I think a different track that the anger can take.
But that comes to the table too,
Absolutely.
because eventually after we go through these exercises and then it's, well, what can I do with it? We
Mhm.
all just sit there and smile and say, that's where advocacy begins.
Mhm.
Activism and advocacy. And we often use the example of Ryan White, that the young boy who died by HIV AIDS, and it wasn't until the families said, this is not good enough. This child should never have died. They didn't have the treatments, they didn't have the protocols that we have now, and it was the families who were impacted by his death and had loved ones also suffering without getting the support they needed that brought HIV and AIDS up to the level of care that became available. Has the stigma and the judgment disappeared? No. No, I think it's gotten better maybe, but that's a wonderful, Ryan's life and death is a wonderful example of how a marginalized and underserved and underrecognized population can step up and say, if they come together, with wellness and advocacy and activism, that we can make a difference.
Mhm.
We actually can. Okay, this next one happens to everybody every day, whether we recognize it or not. And it's a couple, 3, 4. It's a big long one. And it's called discrimination and prejudice equals stigma. I don't like the word stigma myself. I like to call it what it is. It's discrimination. It's judgment and it's prejudice. And people get lazy. They don't want to use 3 words. They want to use 1 word. And sometimes that just doesn't always work, Um, This dovetails into what we were just talking about, and this is in the workbook. And it's so true that, when a loved one has a broken leg or some kind of accident, everyone jumps in and asks how they can help. Oh, and God forbid you announce over social media in particular that you're raising funds for someone with cancer, and the whole world applauds and jumps in, right? But no one ever asked me, and Potter, I don't think you had that experience. Hey, how's your suicide attempt survivor today?
Mm-mm.
No,
There are
everybody
no
go.
casseroles involved. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
someone,
No casseroles, no chocolate cakes.
nothing.
Gee, do you want me to do your laundry? Now, what we did is we had developed, had set up a third documentary in our Voices series, and we talked about that a lot in the film, as to what came down, and that's on the back burner because we're revising it. But I'm just going to read a few of these things, and then Potter, I'm going to ask you to share. It
Mhm.
goes over to, I'm not sure on the same pages, but page 51 in the workbook, that
Yeah.
it may be a little different. And so here's what we put to people. First and foremost, when you're confronted with this stupidity and silliness, break the silence. Your loved one has a public health issue. They are not criminals. You are not a bad parent or a bad friend. And your loved one is not damaged or less than a person if they were battling cancer or diabetes. It's the secrecy and silence that perpetuates the prejudice. And these came from impacted family members, by the way. These weren't written and created. My instinct was to, this is me, by the way.
Mm.
My instinct was to learn everything I could about depression, self-injury, and suicide. And then I realized I was so focusing on my loved one, that is Tracy, not on how to take better care of myself so I could help her. Major revelation that that's what I'm doing. People don't know what to say, so they say stupid things or they avoid talking to me about this. I decided to just talk to everyone about having a family member who struggled with suicidal thinking, and I was stunned at how many people then said, though, yeah, me too. My kid's been to the emergency room. My father has had a suicide attempt, suffers from depression. And we have to break that silence. We talk about that all the time in the workshops. But most of the people who said, yeah, me too, had never said anything out loud or talked to anyone else about it. And yeah, we won't use the profanity down the bottom on that one.
Mhm.
You can read it, sometime if you want. And then we did. We've had more than one family that, because the families were so damn unsupportive, that they just finally sat the family down and said, "Look, this is what it's about. This is what our loved one needs to have: acceptance."
Mhm.
And one of the things that we don't have time to go into, but we know scientifically that young people who are questioning their gender identity, whether it's LGBTQ or it's transgender, that they have extremely high suicide rates. And one of the predominant items that shows up in their profile is that their family would not and did not accept them
Mhm.
as they are,
Right.
as they are.
And there's some evidence that one trusted adult
Yep,
in a transgender youth's life can change that trajectory of
yep,
suicide.
yep. And it's an important research because by the way, the same applies to kids who have been impacted by violence.
Mhm.
Dr. Elizabeth Englander over at the Massachusetts Aggression Reduction Center over at Bridgewater State University specializes in this. And I will never forget the first time she said to me, they need one loving, trusted adult to say, it's okay, you're important, I'll sit and
Mhm.
listen.
Right.
It's that simple. You don't have to be a rocket science to do it.
Right.
So Pata, on the other page, we have some bullet points over there.
Mhm.
Take any and all you want.
Yeah. Let's see. So there's bullet points in terms of prejudice and discrimination. I mean, those are things that are outside of that we're receiving, right? I mean,
Yep.
we're the outside in, and I think it's important to realize that it is just that, just prejudice and discrimination. And I think, and I wonder, and I don't know, Anne-Marie, but I wonder if you are a person in the dominant culture who hasn't experienced a lot of prejudice and discrimination, whether your experience of this might be more startling. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud here, because I mean, as a person who's just serious, a lot of prejudice and discrimination because I'm Japanese American. The prejudice and discrimination about the mental health stuff was different, but not surprising in a
Right.
certain way.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But I do think that that's really about education too. It's like we have to, educate and advocate for
Yep.
ourselves and for the sake of our loved one. And then there's the ones that are about the internal, right? The irrational guilt and shame, the concerns about judgment from others and isolation. And those things are related because people who have judgments, the action can be discriminatory.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, if you just think about, leaving your job because of your family's mental health crisis, that could be discriminated against. Someone could say, well, that's not a good reason to leave your job.
Right.
I mean, a
Right.
boss, say,
Yep.
So there's concern about judgment from others, but, that can have a real life impact. And isolation. I mean, I think isolation, that's the thing that I think this movement has such a powerful impact because it removes the isolation because you finally realize that there are other people like you, that you're not the only one that's sitting scared,
Right.
wondering what now, and that, you can change that. You can change some of these things. Like, you can educate yourself, you can educate others. You can, unpack the guilt and the shame, because that's not yours.
Right.
Like, in terms of like, I mean, my guilt and my shame about my daughter's mental health, or my mother's, actually even more so my mother's, because growing up, of course, the whole community, it was like the crazy woman in the house, and those kids, and all, there's a lot of stuff like that, and but that's not mine. That's the people who are putting that on me, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, and there's nothing to be ashamed about in terms of having an illness.
Right.
No one's ashamed about having the flu.
No.
No one's ashamed about. I mean, and it's really interesting because when I was a professor at the university, I taught a course on equity, and I could talk about all the ways that I have marginalized identities, except the depression. I mean, I did talk about it. And in fact, I was going through a deep depression at the time I was teaching this class. And I knew if I was going through kidney disease, that I would share that. There wouldn't have been a question.
Yeah.
But the
Right.
fact that I had,
Yeah.
depression and PTSD, it was something I did share, but it was hard. And then I had all these students come up to me, in my office telling me about theirs. And that's similar with impacted family and friends, right? I mean, once you open the door and say,
Yep.
this is who I
Yeah.
am. I'm an
Yeah.
impacted family member, and this is how I'm managing. This is how I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah.
This is how I take care of my loved
Yeah.
one. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, me too, and me too, and me too.
Yep. Me too.
Yeah.
So to respond to that, I just anecdotal. There's probably no research on it, right? But anecdotally, I can tell you that the people that I sit with at the table, whether it's our attempt survivor families, eating disorder families, and suicide, or our loss survivors, talking about that behavior. That the people who seem to have the deeper reaction to this ignorance and the stupid things people say or the way they treat them and behave them are those who, like me, are typically white Americans. They're so stunned that they've never had to deal with prejudice or judgment necessarily in their lives. And so I see the depth of the shock that
Mm,
these are my neighbors,
right.
or even worse, this is my family,
Right.
you know, and what happened here? And unfortunately, I'm too aware of the number of families that actually get fractured when there's been a suicidal crisis. There's the group that wants to do everything they can to help that person and make them feel accepted and loved and a part of the family. And then there's others who just literally turn their back.
That's right.
And people just, unless you've had that experience, you cannot possibly comprehend the depth of pain that can create for
Mhm.
someone already struggling with the pain of suicidal thinking, or
Mhm.
someone who has multiple scars on their arms or other parts of their body from self-injuring. And I know that as we're doing live stream tonight, I know there are people out there saying they're back to the why question. Well, why do they do that? We can do a lot of research and we can continue to pour money into research. We can never yet necessarily perfectly identify the underlying causes, but science has been able to identify many of them. And that sometimes creates another silo, another barrier, because people say, well, not my family. And it's like, okay, we know that adverse childhood experiences contribute,
Mhm.
just like it does to violence and substance abuse. Adverse childhood experience and trauma contributes to suicidality in many people. And I think the myth that is still being perpetuated, that 90% of the people who die by suicide had a mental illness. No, they didn't. The CDC came out with research in 2018, and you could almost see the field of suicidology split. There were those who said, I told you, and others who say, oh, no, we need to do research to prove that. And that CDC came out with an incredibly extensive report that 54% of the people who die by suicide have no diagnosed illness. It's not that it was missed, it's not there. And of course, with all of the information we have seen swirling around, the Duchess, Meghan Markle, making it very clear she does not have a diagnosed illness. She became
Mhm.
depressed, not in the sense of an illness, but circumstantial and situational.
Mhm.
And that's why when we're doing our education and training, I'm one of those people who is uncomfortable with some of the trainings and education that I delivered for years
Mhm.
because it's too narrow.
It's
What if
too
because
individual.
right, it's like, well, if your kid doesn't fit this checklist, then he's okay, right? And the answer is no, not
No.
necessarily.
And I think, I mean, we have to look at beyond even the immediate circumstances. We have to look
Mhm.
at the societal circumstances
Right.
and the social determinants of health and the fact that things like racism
Yep.
is a risk factor for suicide.
It
And
absolutely is.
until we start looking broader, we're not going to actually make too many inroads. And we have to think about this in our own lives too. Like what factors are going into my loved ones
Right.
situation. Sometimes it may be, they're being bullied at school, and I'm not saying that's a reason that is a cause
Right.
of suicide.
Right.
I'm
Right.
just
Right.
saying that there might be circumstances that you need to find out that are beyond, a person's like individual,
Right.
like
Right.
physical and psychosocial, self.
And so if you're out there listening to us and you're saying, what does that have to do with these exercises? Everything.
Mhm.
If we don't become aware, if we don't educate ourselves as to what's going on within the world of suicide prevention, then we're missing the boat. We're missing the boat. That's why after we do these exercises, we've completed a year of these exercises, we gently, we don't say you must or you have to, we gently urge anybody who's been sitting at our tables to at least sit in on a basic gatekeeper
Mhm.
suicide prevention 101 session, or go higher in that if you want to. We have a stack of resource books that we use as resources, and say, do a little reading. One of the best things you can do, and we do this at every one of our workshops, we talk about it, it's in the workbook. We have this gift of a wealth of information gathered. People have gone painstakingly to gather resources. It's called the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. And that resource center, by the way, you can't go in, but it's based in Waltham, Mass. So it's right in our backyard. sprc.org. Go there. I promise you this. I challenge all of the people who come to our workshops and any of my trainings and education. I said, listen, go to sprc.org once a day. Just pick out any webinar, read any paper out there, watch a training. I said, and you would go through an entire year and not exhaust the resources that are in there. But it comes down to, we need to be better informed ourselves. Don't let someone else carry that ball. You need to carry it. And so the conversations, that all the topics that we have woven into this, are all threads of the tapestry of wellness. We want you to find inner peace, and we want you to be as healthy emotionally and spiritually, physically, in all ways, so that when your loved one has another crisis, and they may, not everybody, but they may, you're better equipped to deal with it.
Mhm.
Now that I did the best I could with what I had to work with, now we're going to give you an army of resources and education and information. And yes, you will see things differently. I liken it to, I have 2 children. Well, I have Tracy, so that's 3. Tracy's my non-biological daughter, who brings joy to my heart and a smile to my face every day. But I was very young. I was 19 turning 20 when I had my daughter. I didn't have a clue about what to do. I really didn't. I would read Dr. Spock, not Spock on Star Trek. And see, the problem with old books like that is that you think everything in it is gospel. And if you do exactly this, so it was by the book. You don't raise kids by the book. 6 years later, when I had my son, what a world of difference. And that's the same for us with impacted family work. We do these exercises, as Pata said. I don't care how many times you go through it. If your mind and heart are open, you're going to see something new. You're going to hear something you didn't hear before. You're going to say, "Who put that sentence in there? You edited this, right?" No, it was in there in the first place. And it's all to help us find inner peace. The very last exercise we typically bring people to is the hardest. And we're just going to touch on this for a few minutes. And that's the most difficult part of the journey, is the F word. It's not that one, but you hear it a lot during this exercise. We're talking about forgiveness. And it really is. I'm just going to read a little bit of a backdrop here. The greatest gift I was given in my first step to healing, and in my healing, by the way, at the time I'm talking about my domestic violence, was the ability to laugh. And most importantly, to laugh at myself, not ridicule, not demean, but to see the humor in my thinking and behavior, while allowing myself to say inwardly, and they think I'm so perfectly altogether. And I'm not. It took a long time for me to forgive the abuser, to forgive my family for lack of support, to forgive God, whom I blamed of all this happening. But the hardest of all, it was the ability to forgive myself. And this is the single most important exercise that we have in both workshop programs. This is also the most difficult exercise for our attempt survivors, and for our loss survivors, and for us, Potter and I, and others like us, for the impacted family. And the first person on the list has to be us. You want to jump in, Potter?
I mean, I think it's so important to think about. I mean, because we're very critical. I've been very critical of myself. Like, Did I do that right? Am I, did I respond correctly? I mean, my daughter was having struggles in relationships and was with an abusive person. Like, am I supporting her in the best way I can? Like, or is this exacerbating her condition? And like,
Yep. Yep.
and how can I listen but not shut her down? I mean, like, because, if I'm too critical, she might shut down, right? So, I mean, so there's all this stuff, and I have to forgive myself for my missteps, because they're going to be missteps. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm not. And
Yep.
and the more that I can say, yeah, that, that might not have been the best route, and it's okay. I'm just human. I made a mistake, or even, and sometimes we think we can, you know, control things or whatever, and we can't, of
Yeah.
course. So, and when we can't and things go awry, we blame ourselves, right? Why did I do that?
Yep.
Or we do something that might be considered enabling, right? It's like, am I enabling them, or whatever?
Yep.
But so I just feel like, for me, I mean, I've had to really forgive myself, and also I sort of I kind of want to forgive myself preemptively. Like, I want to forgive myself for the stuff I'm going to do in the future here. You know what I mean?
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. I just need to have but basically what I'm saying is, I think we need to have a forgiveness stance. Like, we need to have a forgiveness perspective
Yep.
of,
Yep.
like, the fact that we are not perfect, and we can't know. And you can't know. I mean, I don't know what she's thinking.
Right.
And I can't know that. I don't know what she's feeling, even
Yeah.
though I've had things that are similar. I
Yep.
mean, and sometimes people don't have that, even that frame of reference,
Right.
Some
And
people
that's
are
so
like, I
important.
have
Yeah.
no idea how you're feeling. But if you can forgive yourself for assuming, or for overstepping, or for trying to control, because because you want your loved one to be okay. I mean, that's where it comes from. It comes from the fear and the desire for them to be
Yep.
okay. And but coming to the realization that that doesn't work, that you can't control them, that you have to be, and you have to take care of yourself. And to do that, you have to forgive first yourself, and then whoever else in your world that might have wronged you or something, that then you need to forgive them as well.
Right. Right. And I'll I'll tell you what the other questions were, because we're coming to a close. One of the big ones that attempt survivor families and impacted families, and when they have someone who has chronic suicidal thinking, or whatever that works is, why didn't I see this coming? Because you weren't taught to look for it.
And even if you do see it
Yeah,
coming, you
you
don't have
don't.
control over it.
Nope, you don't have control over it, and it's not like you can fix it. We can't fix this. We can walk with our loved ones and help them find better solutions and better coping skills, but we can't fix it. Um, and another one that a lot of people at the table bring up is, I should have paid more attention. Why didn't I listen better? And again, that's a matter of let go, self-forgive. Um, the point is that if you're at the table now, you're learning. You're learning, and this will come in handy down the line. This will come in handy in many ways in our lives. It isn't just about this. And people people get angry with themselves about, and they again label themselves negatively as being bad parents and not being attentive enough. So what we do with this workshop, this one has a lot of writing in it. We take a long time with this, and sometimes we're on this with forgiveness can sometimes take a couple, 2 or 3 workshops, and we let that play out. That's one of the things, again, I want to stress, is that we don't try to do this in any rigid black and white. There's only one way to do this. It's just the opposite. We want to help you feel that we're hearing you, and we're willing to just sit quietly and listen. By the way, we try not to interrupt the silences. That's a learned experience, by the way, to not interrupt the silences, to allow them to happen. So we work on that too. And if you wanted to know who else might be on the list, this list comes out of, by the way, one of the earlier exercises that we call the scorecard. Some people call it a hit list. So some of the other people and places and institutions that you might find on your forgiveness list, aside from you, is your loved ones for not believing, for not helping, for not trusting, and not standing up and speaking out. Clinicians that may have gotten it wrong,
Mhm.
may have gotten it wrong. Doctors for the same reasons, hospitals for the same as above. Or we talked about we've really kind of taken a beat on the emergency personnel. I need to tell you that we hear a lot from attempt survivors that some of the best people in those emergency rooms are the nurses who seem to have are able to express their compassion or may have had more experience in personally in dealing with someone who is suicidal. And again, I mentioned other family members, and then whatever it is you believe in seems to take a hit too, whether it's God or Allah or whatever you are, or just the universe. Because we sometimes, in our fear, in our pain, we'll feel better if we can blame it on someone, if we can hang it on someone. But that's not always the case. There's an exercise we're not getting to tonight. Actually, there are a number of exercises we didn't get to tonight, and that goes hand in hand with forgiveness and the anger and all of that. And it's that fear and control do not equal love. We think it might, but it doesn't. So we'll discuss that another time. So we have given you a tremendous amount of information in an hour and a half. For those who have seen this and want to see it again, we will be leaving it intact for a few weeks. And then we're going to divide and quarter this into sections and have them available up on a voice at the table for you to see individually, almost like a little classroom. Here's what we talked about. Here's what we talked about. And we're going to be splicing other film into them too. So they become little mini conferences all by themselves for you to have as a resource. So we'll be working on that for the entire year. We already have hundreds of hours of film.
And
Go
and
ahead.
if it speaks to you, watch for the actual online groups and things,
Yep.
because there'll be opportunities for you to experience this. So I
Yep.
encourage people, to watch for the opportunities to join and to see what it's about, firsthand in your experience.
Yep. I can tell you right now that on Wednesday night at 6:30, if you're an attempt survivor or a loss survivor, Tracy Medeiros will be doing a workshop at 6:30 Eastern Time. She will always also be doing a workshop on the 20th, on Saturday, with Steve Palm at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. And then she will be doing one on the oh, I skipped the 17th. 17th is Wednesday. The 17th, 24th, and 31st, Tracy is doing workshops on Wednesday nights at 6:30. That's for the attempt and loss survivors together. And then she's doing 2 Saturdays. We've already done one, and Steve Palm really takes the lead in these. And so that will be on the 20th. And then I will also post out there, we have at least 4 impacted family finding inner peace workshops. The things we talked about with you tonight, we'll be focusing on one of those exercises in each of the 4. And then we'll get the April schedule out before May ends, and there'll be 12 for you to jump in on. We'll be doing other things too. We're still going to be live streaming. We're still going to be doing other webinars and stuff. So there's a lot of information out here for you if you're an impacted family member or you're one of our loved ones. Again, this is coming to you, and I really need to stress this. This is a collaboration. No one group could have done this. This is a collaboration from a voiceofthetable.org, which is the home base for the movement of impacted family. We also, a couple of years ago, collaborated with and partnered with the American Association of Suicidology, AAS. AAS has a division dedicated to us, impacted family and friends. It's a very proactive advocacy group. We'd love to have you on board. And again, I think I had shared the email across that you can get in touch with us on. And so you're seeing that going across. Director at a Voice the Table. If you want specific links for the workshops that we've been talking about, you want to talk to us about getting on board with us at AAS. That's cool too. When are we going to do this? We'll be having a motorcycle run this summer, hopefully in person. And the same thing in early October, we'll be having our Light the Way walks again in Bristol County, Mass. And we'll be doing some other things. We're starting a tapestry of voices, which is going to be a series of 2-hour webinars. We had planned on doing them as all-day retreats, but starting in April, we're going to be starting across the spring and summer, Pata. I'll talk to you about that in a bit. Because
Something else I didn't know about.
Well, I finally found a format
That's
and a
good.
platform for it.
Excellent.
So we're going to start out with Dr. Kathleen Carter Martinez from upstate New York, and she's going to talk to you about permission granted, and it's all about trauma. So that will be a good opening. And with that, Pata, any last thoughts?
No, I just hope that people who would like to join us take the step. Take action, folks.
And it's so easy virtually. You don't even have to drive someplace.
That's right.
I mean, that's if you were in Massachusetts. Obviously, you wouldn't drive from Missouri or Canada or whatever, but
Right.
virtual works out really well for us right now. I want to thank you all. Look forward to meeting some more of you, and take good care. Good night.
Take care. Good night.